Anyways, I want to do two things, but before I get started, I want to thank Ed for having me here, and it literally was the only weekend that I could make it. And I love it because I'm from Blacksburg, Virginia, okay? So I'll get started with the most important slide. I'm really glad I'm on right now, because at about 11:30 or so, a lot of people are going to be looking at their phones for the game cast. Don't worry, Lauren, I will not be one of those people. But I was raised in Blacksburg. When I was a month old, my family moved to Blacksburg, Virginia. My dad's a professor there. My mom's a real estate agent, so if you've ever seen the last name Mostaghimi anywhere, Patty Mostaghimi is my mother. That's something that I grew up with, so I've always behaved myself. But what I want to do is two things. I want to very briefly tell you where I come from, how I ended up in the Mississippi Delta, because it's kind of weird. And then the second part is I actually want to take some of the lessons and the strategies and things like that we've learned in the Delta and show them to you all with the intent not necessarily of bragging and saying these are really awesome programs, but really with the intent of getting ideas and feedback from you all and ideas and suggestions. And this entire weekend end of the week and weekend has been amazing so far, because there's so many unique and interesting ideas out there. Casey's not here this morning. I found out I've been staying in an apartment with her. She sent me a text at 5:30 and said she was at the airport, but I want to make sure to thank her as well. Casey Otis Cody is from the Center for Public Leadership, and she heads up the Gleitzman Fellowship along with Ed, and they've done a tremendous job. Okay, they've done an absolutely tremendous job. Of getting people to really think differently about their lives and to push them towards and keep them in social activism. So my story begins not here. This is in Wilmette, Illinois, right north of Chicago. It's that Baha'i house of worship. My family ended up coming to the United States as refugees from Iran, fleeing the religious persecution of the Baha'is in that country. For folks who don't know what the Baha'i faith is, just like the 10-second blip, it's a religion that believes that all the world's religions come from the same God. They have different social messages and laws based on the time of history and what peoples they came out to, but that fundamentally all religions agree on the basic aspects of the golden rule, right? Do good unto people, and obviously there's the reciprocal part, but as far as I'm concerned, it's the do good unto other people part. And coming from that background of persecution, you'd assume, okay, he's going to get up here and he's going to rail on the Iranian regime and all this stuff. And no, I've never been to Iran, but I would love to go. But my narrative was built by my grandparents and my family, where that persecution was turned into what can we learn from this? They talked to me about the power of education, the importance of understanding the world around you. They talked to me about the importance of speaking up for people who either cannot speak for themselves or just aren't listened to. They taught me the importance of speaking out even when it's not in my own self-interest, if it's better for the rest of the world. In other words, if I have to sacrifice myself for the greater good, then that's what I'm here on this planet to do. Very odd narrative coming from that background. So what I ended up doing was I thought that my place in the world was at Johns Hopkins University. I was going to go into global security. I was going to make the world a safer place. Okay? Especially coming from, my parents are from Iran. That part of the world I hear these days is a little bit unstable. I was like, look, maybe I can be the answer. I'm that weird Boy Scout kid from Blacksburg, Virginia. I can go up there. I can speak Farsi. We'll work things out, and it'll be all peaceful and well and good. So to make that happen, I took a really interesting leap to a defense contracting firm. Oh, man, it got quiet. So this is Booz Allen Hamilton. That's when they were flying the shuttle to retire it and stuff like that. Booz Allen Hamilton has been in the news a couple of times. Some guy named Snowden and all that stuff. But I worked for Booz Allen Hamilton. I was a defense contractor. I'm very proud of having been a defense contractor because despite the name that we give them, they do some very, very important things in this world that we don't give them credit for. When I came this morning, if I walked into the room with this on, you wouldn't think I'm a suicide bomber. And the reason is because of these folks. Okay, honestly. So as much as we disparage them and things like that, as, they're taking government money and we don't know what they're doing and things like that, just remember next time that sometimes they look just like a guy like me. Okay? Now, that might not be comforting to you. But they look like me. Some of them look like me. Okay, so I went to Booz Allen Hamilton, and I was there for about 5 years. And I was young, and I was an idiot, okay? I took a dare, all right? And I was dared to apply to this thing called Teach for America. Has anybody heard of that? Raise your hand if you've ever heard of it. Okay, all right. So usually I get boozed, but all right, that's cool. So I didn't know what this thing was. I was like, okay, I'll just apply to the thing. 30 minutes, wrote up something, and then you submit it. And the next thing I know, I have a call to go for an interview, and I'm just laughing, right? I've already lined up, like, my nice apartment in Baltimore's Inner Harbor. Like, I've lined up my nice, cushy office. I know exactly what I'm going to do with my life. I'm going to make the world a safer place, and meanwhile, make my bank account go up really high. And it's like a win-win for everybody, right? Well, life doesn't always work out the way you want it to. And the next thing I knew, I was in the Mississippi Delta. Okay? So I went to the Mississippi Delta, and my mantra the entire time, the first time I was there, I went back a second time. Wow, a glutton for punishment. The first time I went there, my mantra was, look, it's only 2 years. I'll go teach in a classroom. I'll try really, really hard. Maybe I'll have an impact on 1 or 2 kids, right? I had very low expectations of what I could achieve, and thank goodness I had low expectations, because I did not even achieve that piece. And so not only was I in the Mississippi Delta, but I was a defense contractor. I said, yes, I want to teach high school civics. And instead, I was teaching in a classroom that looked like this, 4th and 5th grade science and social studies. This classroom right here is in Shelby, Mississippi. If you'll notice, the paint is peeling off the walls. The desks are somewhat broken. There's no teacher in there, which, frankly, there are no students in there either. But on a regular basis, there wouldn't be a teacher in there. And what I found out when I got placed there was I was put in the worst school in the state of Mississippi. And the state of Mississippi was, at that time, the worst state in America for public education. So I was like, great. I'm glad I had low expectations. 1 to 2 kids were good, right? I got into the classroom, and the first child who met me was a 5th grader who was 6'2". The second child who I ran into was 6'1". So I was like, uh-oh, something is going on here that I don't know about. No one has prepared me for this, right? I was in Baltimore City, and I ran a tutoring program, and we went, and, I know a lot of kids, right? But I had never seen kids who were this tall, okay? But lo and behold, these children on average were 13 to 14 years old. They're in 5th grade. You're supposed to be 10 or 11, all right? They're 13 to 14 years old and about 4 years behind in their education, okay? So they're at like a 2nd grade level, and they're like 15, okay? That's a very big gap from where you're supposed to be to where they are. And those are that's the average, right? I had kids who turned 15 who offered me a ride to school as long as I would sit in there with them, who couldn't write their name. And it wasn't because they weren't able. It's not like I had a bunch of kids who were just idiots. It's because nobody ever taught them. They were 15 years old. They had spent at least 9 years in the system already, and they couldn't even spell their names. It's ridiculous. This is in the United States of America, okay? Not only is it in the United States of America, it's just south of Memphis, Tennessee. It's just north of Jackson, Mississippi. It's a really, really rural place, but it's a place that we've purposefully forgotten. It's a place where we get that little expose in the New York Times once a year or whatever, and they highlight some cool things going on down there, and then that's it, right? Then they come back the next year and say, oh, remember this place again? And then we just kind of, oh, that was a cool read, and we keep going. So I was like, all right, well, I'm here for 2 years. How bad could it be? First day of class. Okay, after everybody walks in, a child comes up to me and says, I'm going to fight you. And I started laughing, okay, because I'm like, this kid's as big as I am. I was really skinny back then. You'll see a picture of me in a minute. Mississippi fried food is amazing, but really bad for you. We have the best catfish in the world. We're the catfish capital of the world is in the Delta. It's called Belzona, Mississippi. And I laughed, right? And then the kid threw a punch, and I was not laughing anymore. Okay, but I'm not going to tell you the rest of that story because I might get arrested for it. So I was sitting there, and I'm like, look, things are really bad here. Why is this way, right? When that child got in trouble, thankfully, for trying to punch me, he ended up getting whooped. How many people know what it means to get whooped? Okay, good. Put your hands down. How many of you have been whooped with a board that looks like a cricket bat, bent over the desk, okay, in a principal's office, sometimes out in the hallway, and they give you licks? How many people have had that happen to them? Okay, so a couple of people, all right? Now, some people will say there's nothing inherently wrong about that, okay? And I'm going to argue that's false. And the reason that's false is all the research out there shows that if you beat a child, no matter how you're doing it or when or whatever, it builds all sorts of bad, mental things in them that makes bad things happen, okay? That was really, really technical of me. That's about the height of technicality that I'll get into. So I was sitting here going, holy crap, where am I, right? I'm going to leave after 2 years, and then another disaster happened. So this is my classroom. You'll notice the stark difference between the old classroom. And as a first-year teacher, I had to pay for it all myself because they didn't have any school funds, or they said they didn't, right? It still looks kind of crappy if you compare it to school anywhere else in America. But this girl in the back, named Laquita, walked into the classroom after one of those 6-foot-tall girls, and she stole my heart. Laquita was 10 years old. She had these big pigtails, I'll show you in a minute, and she was a 10-year-old Delta version of myself. Right? Like, you're kind of trying to imagine that. It doesn't really make sense to you. I understand that. But in every way possible, this girl was that 10-year-old version of myself. Well, Laquita, and this is Laquita on the right. Rashima is her friend on the left for you guys. Laquita, her mother worked at the casinos up in Tunica, Mississippi. So her mother would never come home until about 7 or 8 o'clock at night. So Laquita's mother asked me, she's like, look, Laquita seems to have taken to. She likes you a whole lot. Can you just keep her? And I was like, wait, hold on. Whoa there. I am 21 years old, 22 years old. I'm a defense contractor. I do not know what to do with children, right? I could make like a Bombs for Kids program, but I can't. I don't know what else to do. But she's like, look, no, I didn't mean just like keep her permanently. Keep her just until like 7 o'clock and then bring her home. I was like, okay, it doesn't sound too bad. And she's like, yeah, she'll help you clean up around the classroom and stuff like that. So Laquita and I became best buddies, okay? We started going out. This is her cousin on the left. We started going out to the pond and learning about ecosystems and things like that because I'm a big science nerd. And I absolutely fell in love with her. We'd eat dinner together every evening inside the classroom. And I kept her to the point where the principal made a waiver for her so that on teacher work days, she could actually stay in the classroom with me. No kids are supposed to come to school on teacher work days, right? But she would stay in the classroom with me, and she'd just do work, or I don't actually know half the time what she was doing in the classroom, but she was safe. She was doing positive things, right? Worst case scenario, she was on the internet, and that was before a lot of this world star hip-hop stuff and all that crap is up there. It was before like a lot of people knew about YouTube. She definitely did not know about YouTube. So it was kind of like math and educational games. Well, one day I was going home for Thanksgiving, and it was a Wednesday, right? 12-hour drive ahead of me. I was going to go right after school, so I'd get home by like 2 or 3 in the morning. And so I took Laquita back to her trailer, which is in a rural part of Mountain Bayou, Mississippi, just south of Shelby, which is where we were. And I told her mom, I'm like, I have to drop her off early today because I have to go home. And she's like, sure, just drop her off. I'll be there at 7. It'll be okay. Well, that evening, when Laquita was alone at home, burglars came into her trailer. And thankfully, this girl's extremely skinny and tiny and smart. So she went and she hid under her mother's sheets on her bed. And she just laid there as still as humanly possible as the burglars literally took the things right off the nightstand next to her. And I thank God to this day that they left right after that. They did not find her. But the moral for me when I found this out, when I came back from break, Laquita is like, hey, this happened. I don't think I should be home. I'm like, yeah, that's fair. All right. No, I'm not gonna take you home for any reason until your mother's there. But what I realized was that Laquita wasn't by herself. There are thousands of Laquitas in the Delta. There are tens of hundreds in Roanoke. There are millions of Laquitas across our entire world. And so I told myself, let me figure out something beyond this classroom, because as soon as this girl goes on to the 6th grade, they're going to start undoing all the impact that I had on her in 5th grade. So I said, hey, let me go to Harvard. Not actually. I accidentally got into Harvard. And I don't mean that to be humble. I legitimately accidentally got into Harvard. I applied there by mistake. But it ended up being, again, one of the best mistakes I've ever made in my life, right? I actually came home one day and I had an acceptance letter from UCLA, and I was like, amazing, full ride to UCLA, all this stuff. And then my wife made me realize that I was looking up the rankings for the wrong programs. And thankfully, Harvard was ranked high, right? Not that rankings are everything, but I was shallow. I was a defense contractor, right? So I went to Harvard with the intent of, let me keep in touch with Laquita. Let me get more information and figure out how to fix this broken system so that the thousands and the hundreds of thousands and the millions of Laquitas don't have to go through this. And so two things remained constant throughout this entire time. One was, it's a 2-year program. One was every week I had my Gleitzman Fellowship evening dinner. It was on Thursday nights at that point, and we'd sit down and we'd talk about cool ideas and be all innovative and stuff. And then the other one was I'd always get a call from Laquita where we'd talk about that week's, doings, whatever had happened. And this continued, got into my second year. The Gleitzman Fellowship things continued, but I stopped getting calls from Laquita. And I'd try calling her, and I'd get no response. Until finally, about halfway into my second year, I get a call from her principal. And her principal says, Mr. Mostaghimi, you need to come down here. Laquita is messing everything up. I'm about to expel her. She's been flipping desks, throwing them at teachers and things. I was like, okay, that doesn't sound very good. Let me come down. So I flew down to the Delta. And when I flew down, she gave me this big sob story of what's going on, and I'm very heartless, I'll be honest, right? Because I told her that's not an excuse. You can't use that as an excuse to mess up your life, right? Because otherwise, everybody here should mess up their lives. Like, it's not worth living, frankly, if all you're going to do is excuse your bad habits because of what's going on around you. And so I made her a deal. I said, look, if you fix everything, if you turn yourself around 180 degrees, get your grades back up to A's, 0 problems at school, and you're so good that your principal calls me randomly one day and says, she has been so amazing that it's incredible, then I'll move back to the Delta, I'll move back with my wife, and we'll make this happen. We'll make sure that you get into college. Well, thankfully I talked to my wife beforehand. Key note to anybody out there, okay? I had talked to my wife beforehand, and I imagine there's like a 10% chance of this happening. It had gotten so bad that I was like, look, internally I was like, this just set my expectations low because this is not gonna work. So 2 months later, I get a call from her principal, and I'm like, oh crap, she got expelled. And he says, I don't know how hard you hit this girl, okay? But she fixed everything. And I'm like, well, hold on a minute. Ha, ha, ha. She must be standing in there. He's like, no, why would she be doing that? She hasn't been up here in months. And I'm like, well, no, okay, did she tell you about something? She's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I just wanted to call you to thank you for however hard you hit her. It really knocked some sense into her. And I was like, crap. So a week later, I went down to the Delta with my wife this time, picked Laquita up, and she picked out the house that we were going to live in. Like, legitimately. She walked in there. She had been watching HGTV in anticipation of us coming down. And she said, I want 10-foot tall ceilings. I want crown molding. And thankfully in the Delta, you can get that for very cheap, okay? And so this is Laquita on the right hand. That's my wife on the left hand. We went down there. We bought a house. We didn't have jobs. Again, bad ideas, right? And then not only that, though, we had a son. This is Kaveh Mostaghimi. He's 15 months old now. And so we were down there. We have a son. We're taking care of Laquita. We're taking care of a bunch of other kids also. And, thankfully both my wife and I end up employed, which is really great because it's kind of, it's not a good idea to buy a house if you don't have a job, okay? And thankfully, over the last 4 years, Laquita has turned into this Laquita now. And she is in her senior year in high school. And she's gotten into a 4-year university, which is the first time anyone in her family has gotten into a 4-year school. She's looking at going there, actually, which will be when she goes. She's going to be the first person in her family ever to go. And we've made the commitment to her to make sure that she succeeds there. Now, the reason I tell you this is not to brag on myself or brag on Laquita or anything like that, but it's to show you what you can do if you really take an interest in somebody. It doesn't have to be my Laquita, although if you want to show interest in her, that'd be great, right? Find your own Laquita. Help one other person out. Help their family out. Help their friends out. And together we can make a huge impact. Doesn't matter what background you have. I'm a defense contractor. What do I have to do with kids, right? But you can take the chance now and make that choice. You don't have to be a big-time developer. You don't have to be a person that does amazing things in your own community. You can come to the Delta and do it too, okay? So let me get very quickly into what I do, okay? And this is kind of weird because this is that whole lifestyles thing. I don't ever actually know when I'm working and when I'm not working because they all perfectly blend together. And my wife actually decided that she was going to keep track of how much I worked, and she said that on average I worked about like 75 to 80 hours a week, at which point I told her that's not part of my job, right? And then she left me alone, although I really am not sure what is and what isn't part of my job. But I work for the Center for Education Innovation, which is a nonprofit funded by the Kellogg Foundation, and we're looking for some additional funders out there, by the way. And what we do at the Center for Education Innovation is we look at cross-sector approaches towards making differences in our communities. And the reason that I'm going to talk about these three next things is because I want to bring out ideas that will help you and your Laquitas. Okay? I want to bring out ideas that will hopefully get you to think about what you can do. So this is probably the last thing you want to see, a supply and demand curve, right? In undergrad, I was an economics and international relations major, so it all comes back to supply and demand. Where those two lines cross, that's supposed to be market efficiency, right? That's where the best outcomes are had by the most number of people. Well, before I get into what this has to do with education, let me talk about two definitions. The first one is real quality education. Real quality education is when kids are learning in higher order ways, okay? They're learning how to think in a 21st century knowledge economy, not rote memorization, no longer textbooks and things like that. Perceived quality education feels good and looks good, but educates in the same way we've been educating forever. Okay, so think about schools with iPads, but all they're doing on the iPad is reading a textbook. Really, guys? Like, we couldn't be more innovative than that. Sure, it helps out because they have less back pain as they go home and things like that, but that has no impact on their actual education, right? You can read a book, you can read it on an iPad, it's the same deal. Well, in education, what you have, and instead of price and quantity, you have the real quality of schools, which is on the vertical axis, and the quantity of quality schools on the base axis. And what we've found is that reforms around supply are really common. People talk about charter schools, fixing teachers, all this stuff. Let's fix the supply of education. But the perverse thing that happens when you only shift supply is that you get a higher quantity of quality schools, but these are quality schools in the sense of the perceived quality, right? A school may go and say, okay, parents are really pissed off. Let me clean the floors better. Let me put up new lockers. Let me repaint stuff, take the graffiti down, and then we're all good, right? And that's what they do. And a lot of parents are fooled into thinking that's what a great school is. But in fact, our real quality of education decreases. Why? Because people aren't demanding the actual academic piece. So the demand side reforms are more important. The demand curve is the one that's shifted up. And what you see is when it shifts up, you actually get both a real quality of schools increase, so your quality is going up in a real way, and the quantity of quality high schools is going up as well. And that's your best case scenario. But it's hard because you have to talk to people. You can't just force stuff down a teacher's throat. You can't just build a fancier building. You actually have to build that demand for education among people. So how do we do this? There are three things, okay? And I'm going to actually explain what these are very, very quickly because I'm almost running out of time. The first piece is you build transparency around academic outcomes. People literally don't know how their schools are doing. I'm not going to rag on Roanoke too much, but I had a person yesterday tell me, oh, Roanoke schools are great. They're not. And I tell you they're not because I looked up the graduation rate on my phone this morning, and it's about 66% in Roanoke City for certain populations, for certain groups. That's not good. Because if that was good, I'd say, hey, how about you volunteer to have your child drop out, and we'll just have them be part of the, and you'd say, oh, great, that's a quality education. No, you're never going to tell me that, right? The second thing is educate the public about what these numbers mean when you create transparency and demonstrate what quality looks like by taking them to see what an excellent school looks like. There's nothing that, part of my language, pisses off an administrator more than taking somebody else to, one of their kids to another district or one of their parents to another district and showing them what quality actually looks like. And the third thing is to engage the public in the school decision-making process. And I don't mean having like forums and stuff. Yeah, that's important. But actually getting them in there to develop the policies. So the first piece is around building transparency. You all should have a copy of this. Hopefully I made enough copies. This is our education scorecard project. For people who haven't or don't have a copy, what we essentially do is in 3 parts, we talk about education of their schools. This is the school district that I worked in, okay? Notice how small the district is first. Notice that big F, right? That pretty much talks about everything. And then look at their ACT scores. They haven't gone up. I know we do the SATs here, but the ACTs, you have to have an 18 to be college ready in Mississippi. You have to have a 21 to be college ready anywhere else in America. Okay, weird, right? That red line is where they're supposed to be. We've had tons of reforms, and that red line's always where it's been, and the bars underneath are always where they are. So you have to put this information out there in a way that they can understand. And we have community meetings where we teach people, what does it mean to be proficient? What does it mean to be advanced? What does it mean to be basic or minimal? What does it mean when your child comes home and this is the grade that they're being given on a state test, right? And in addition, how are the ways that school districts can play around with these numbers to make them look good even though they're not, right? Not what a superintendent would want. This is something that's been so interesting and so impactful so far. We rolled it out statewide this year. We're actually in the process of rolling it out statewide. We started a pilot project using crowd tilt last year. It only cost us like $3,000 to get off the ground. And what we're doing is not just putting it online, because the people who need to see this don't have access to the internet or a printer. We're getting this into their hands via trusted community members, not the leaders, not the mayors, because they don't want this information out, not the superintendents, because they don't want this information out. Unfortunately, in our area, not even the preachers, because they're often the superintendents and the mayors. And I mean, it's the same people, right? We get them to the grandma in the neighborhood who knows everybody. And if you want to know how to find that grandma, you have to go to the neighborhood. You actually have to go and sit down with people. You have to learn. You have to talk to them. Use a child as a way to get in the door. If you know the child, hey, I taught Laquita. Can I come in? Yeah, why not? I don't know who you are, right? And that's how it would continue. The second piece is educating the public and demonstrating quality. We have the DASH Coalition, which takes 3 small towns, Duncan, Alligator, and Shelby. Shelby is 2,000 people. Duncan is 500. Alligator, they say is 200, but it's really like 120. We take folks from those towns and other communities and legitimately show them schools that are being turned around, that are excellent, high-quality schools. We show them what it looks like. Meanwhile, we start working on the kids. We have a program called the Peer Power Program that was modeled off of the East High Peer Power Program in Memphis, Tennessee. We kind of had to ruralize it a bit. And what the program does is it takes high-performing college students, matches them with high-performing high school students, and as a team, they mentor and tutor a group of middle school students. You essentially create a dual mentorship model where everyone knows, oh, that's what it looks like to be at the next level, right? And not only do you just tutor them, we have great results in terms of tutoring them, but you take them to go see places, see what a university looks like, what it takes to get into a university, see what it looks like to be a weatherman, see what it looks like to actually have talent and show your talent to the world, right? So we have a lot of the arts infused in there. We have a lot of academics as well. That's for 7th and 8th graders. When they get into 9th through 12th grade, we have the SICK program, Students Involved in Community Change. And that was actually started by a group of students. And what we do in that program, and something that I think would work in Roanoke as well and many other places, is when you get a child activated, when you get them, for lack of another word, pissed off about their circumstance, and you give them the tools for what they need to say, how to say it, and the knowledge of what they can do to make a difference, they will not only suddenly get involved, but their grades will grow up, they'll graduate, they'll go to college. Why? Because in many cases they've been told, oh, you don't matter. You're just a young kid from the ghetto. Nobody cares about you. Unfortunately, no one does care about them in many cases. But that's not the narrative you build if you want to empower yourself. So we help them empower themselves by saying, hey, look, you can make a difference. This is your town. Your leaders are not good. You know that. So let's make a difference. These are actually the kids at the Capitol in Jackson talking about the necessity for a quality education. I'm actually going to show you a picture of Miley Cyrus. And the reason I was going to show a picture of Miley Cyrus is because she has a tattoo on her arm, right? Which is a life-guiding quote for me. If you don't know who Miley Cyrus is, Google Miley plus twerking, okay? If you have, strong emotional feelings towards things that aren't very, provocative dancing and things like that, don't Google it. But on her arm, she has this quote. Oh, thank you. Hey, there's Miley. She has this quote that also apparently was from this guy named, can I go one more slide ahead? Because I can't. There you go. It also happens to be, Teddy Roosevelt also said this. I mean, who knew, right? And it's a quote from Teddy Roosevelt in 1921 at the Sorbonne in Paris, where he says the following: "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasm, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while doing greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat." Ladies and gentlemen, you are the men in the arena. You are the women in the arena. Let's make it happen.